All right. My name is Mike Quinlan. I am the chair of the Dale Street School Building Committee, and we will open the meeting at 7:05 p.m. as we have a quorum of the school building committee members. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of open meeting law, General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place, this meeting of the Medfield Dale Street School Building Committee is being conducted via remote participation. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings as provided for in the EO. A reminder that persons who would like to view this meeting while in progress may do so by following the instructions on the agenda and meeting notice. And let me just make sure. It's also just to note that this meeting is being recorded. Okay. So start off, I will hand it off to Lynn Stapleton, our owner's project manager from Left Field.
Good evening, everybody. The first thing on the agenda is the approval of the March 26th SBC meeting minutes. I hope everyone got their packet with the meeting minutes included.
Yes, I did. I certainly did. Has anybody not received the meeting minutes from March 26th? Does anybody have any?
I received them.
Did anybody have any questions or edits?
Mike, it looks like Chris has a question in the question and answer.
So question noted from a member of the public on the meeting minutes on 326, page 4, regarding feedback on draft PDP. Noted the field between Memorial and Dale was not used for softball since softball was specifically stated in PDP. I know this was occasional athletic use on the field, but just not for softball. Thanks to my daughter's involvement for the past many years. Can you scroll to that section, Lynn?
Yeah, I had clarified that during the meeting that it's used for field hockey.
It's what page did it say it was on? You want me to pull up the PDP, Mike?
No, I would ask Ms. Potts if she knows which specific page. She's referring to page 4 of the meeting minutes.
It's on page 4 under number 9. I think if you replace the word athletics with softball, that would correct it. So page 4 under Roman 5, number 9. It looks like it's with the 7th line down, not used by the high school for athletics. I think it should say softball, as I understand the correction.
Okay. Okay. All right.
All right, so that question's resolved. So if you could make those edits. Any other questions or edits on the meeting minutes? Okay. Not hearing any. I'll entertain a motion to approve the meeting minutes as edited.
So moved.
Second. From Tim Bonfant.
That was
Jeff Marsden moved. Tim seconded. And I'll run down the list for roll call. Start with Mike Marcucci.
Aye.
Walt Kincaid. Walt, are you there? You're muted. Okay, we'll skip Walt. Mike Weber,
Yeah.
Sounds like Walt's having some trouble.
Walt's.
Walt's
Walt's-
Calling in
Sound
from
like-
the submarine.
Yeah, no, I'm good with these.
Walt, if you can hear us, you might want to reconnect. It sounds like you're having some signal issues. All right, Tom Earl,
Aye.
Anna Mae O'Shea, Brooke,
Yeah.
Jeff Marsden,
Yes.
Tim Bunfati,
Yes.
and myself, Mike Quinlan. I also vote yes. We will put
Leo? Is Leo not on? Okay.
Leo is not on, to my
Okay.
knowledge.
He's
Um,
trying to get on.
He's trying to get on right now.
Is he having issues?
Yeah.
Okay. Hopefully,
He's outvoted on the minutes anyway, so even if he shows up, the minutes have already approved, so you can probably just.
agreed. Yeah, agreed. So we will keep Walt and Leo off of that vote, but there's still an adequate vote in favor of the minutes, so they are approved as edited. Next up, Lynn.
The next topic is the preferred schematic report, and Arrow Street does have a presentation to go through. But just quickly on the PSR, we have extended the submission date of the PSR to September 9th. And
Lynn, we should actually discuss that. I know we've talked about it informally in the working group, but it hasn't formally been presented to this group. But the way I look at it, and as long as everybody else is on board with it, based on the meeting we had with the Board of Selectmen and the warrant committee and school committee, I felt that it was best not to try to this too quickly through to the July submission, which seemed aggressive. So I asked Lynn to evaluate the schedule based on pushing back to the September 8th submission. So before we move forward on that, I just wanted to make sure that everybody here was okay with that. So if anybody wants to comment, please chime in.
Mike, I have a question.
Yeah.
And why is it we have to decide this now?
Well, realistically speaking, I don't see a path for us to get the decisions that need to be made in order to proceed with a July submission, because it would require making a decision on grade configuration within the next week or two, which I didn't feel like everybody was comfortable with. What I would like to do is have a plan that is realistic, and it seemed to me that chasing a July 8th submission was unrealistic. I don't see a path to that right now based on the feedback that I got and basically where I see the project standing and the amount of work that I believe we need to do to gain consensus on the configuration.
And why is it we'd have to decide that in the next week or two to make a July deadline?
Well, I mean, we really don't, but it basically, I mean, unless maybe you see a pathway to that still being a possibility. I specifically don't. That would mean that the Board of Selectmen and the school committee and this committee would need to vote on an agreed upon grade configuration within the next 2 weeks. And given that we're likely not going to have another SBC meeting for another at least 2 weeks, if not a month, I just didn't see possibility of us actually achieving that milestone.
I guess that goes back to my question: is why is it we'd have to decide that within the next couple of weeks?
So I would offer that up to Lynn and to Larry to sort of lay out the reasoning behind that, because a lot of it impacts how they're able to perform the amount of work that needs to be done in order to put that submission together. So Lynn or Larry, do you want to chime in a little on that?
Yes, we need, Arrow Street really needs to have a site and a preferred grade configuration decided upon if we're going to make a July 8th submission to MSBA. We were targeting the first week of May for a decision on those two things at the very latest, because we have to put together not just one preferred option. We have to put together alternatives as well for that submission. And there's also a lot of additional due diligence work that has to be done on the site for the PSR submission. So that would only get, even making a decision in early May, and given the timeframes that we need to vote approval of the preferred schematic and then approval of the submission of the PSR, when you back those dates out and given time frame to review the draft, you're really down to about 6 weeks of time to get the work done.
So yeah, let me jump in and sort of outline. So what the MSBA expects is for us to fully vet both sites, and that's from a due diligence standpoint, which really means making sure that both sites are buildable as we might expect. They also want us to go through a series of option studies. In this case, it'll be options to look at the 4-5 configuration and the 3-4-5 configuration. And we'll show some of that tonight. You'll see it's in the early planning stages. Also, add alter renovation, new build, and they really want us to study that thoroughly, us being the building committee. Although we'll be doing most of the work, present it to you, and you have a good and robust discussion about it, and pick a preferred site and a preferred configuration. And then the preferred scheme kind of gets developed a bit more, and then the whole thing gets packaged up. Again, another couple of 100 pages of report documenting, excuse me, the process, including whatever public meetings and other public input we've had, and gets submitted again to the MSBA. Size of the document is much like the PDP, which you remember went over 1,000 pages once you included a bunch of appendices. Just looking quickly, sort of backing it through the sort of key pieces for us. There's a submission date. There's the vote of this committee to give us authorization or approval to submit. There is a draft that we would give to the committee for you guys to review it and give us back feedback, comments, questions, etc., which gets rolled back into the final. And then sort of backing further out is doing some due diligence on the preferred scheme, and then the alternates that I mentioned, as well as Mike had mentioned, the sort of testing and other kind of technical work to evaluate the sites. We'll have geotechnical folks out. We're putting in a request to Mass Historic to look at the properties, etc. So as Lynn was mentioning and Mike mentioned, we think targeting roughly early May for a decision on the grade level configuration and the site, although I think we could keep the site open because we'll be looking at options, would be necessary for us to hit the July submission. And I think, you know, one thing is we have run out the schedule to show what happens between if we were to defer till September. And we can review that and sort of circle back to this question if folks on the committee are interested in doing it that way. I think the one thing you guys should note is that because we are aiming for certain board cycles of the MSBA, we can't just defer by a month. We have to go for the next board meeting, which then puts us back to September from a July submittal. So I don't know if that gives you a little more input on the issues involved.
And depending on what's decided on the grade configuration, that you'd only look at that grade configuration in the next report. And so you need to know that answer before you decide what's going to go into the report.
Well, we are going to be looking at both grade configurations, but at some point to develop the preferred scheme and the preferred site, we will want this group plus whoever else in the community to develop a decision on the grade level configuration. And we know it's a large dollar value. It also is important to the school and the school committee. So we know that's going to be an important conversation to have and discussion. From the standpoint of Arrow Street, you know, we always say we can do what you're after. But I think talking through with the working group after our previous meeting, we felt like the more prudent thing might be to aim for September.
And I would add, Mike, that moving the PSR to September, at the very least, doesn't seem to have a huge impact on the overall schedule, on being a realistic overall schedule. It still allows us the time that I think is needed to build some consensus around the decision. And ultimately, the part of this phase that we're in is about taking all of the options that we have on the table through PDP and start to narrow it down. And the two biggest decisions are the grade configuration and the site. And then we get into the specifics of the design of the building on a site. Those two other big decisions are kind of critical ways to start to funnel down all these options into what will result with our preferred option.
I appreciate that. I guess and I'm not disagreeing with pushing the schedule back. I just want to understand why and what it is we lose by pushing it back. In particular, and this is my regular refrain at all meetings now, is that given the continuing degree of uncertainty that we have about everything, I'm sort of hesitant to make final judgments about things on schedules if we don't have to. Now, if you're saying we have to decide now so we can get on this other schedule, because you don't know what the next version of the bailout stimulus package is going to be, if it might include money for infrastructure that conceivably could trickle down to our benefit. As you may recall, during the last stimulus, there was great fanfare and hullabaloo about money coming down to quote unquote shovel-ready projects, and only to have the government realize they didn't have enough shovel-ready projects to put money into. And so I certainly would not want us to exempt ourselves if the federal money printing machine is going to open up yet again for infrastructure projects to be out of the mix for that. Because I would think the further you are along, the further you'd be eligible if there's going to be more money than there might otherwise be. Are we sure that, for example, that the MSBA is going to stick to their current schedule?
So the MSBA issued a statement to all their districts that are in their program this week, and it was, as expected, rather vague, given that there's not a lot of certainty out there in the market right now. And they have noted that there is, and I know there's been sort of hints of this out in Medfield Facebook posts, but the MSBA has indicated that there's no plan to reduce any reimbursement rates. They do their reimbursement rates and everything based on when they invite you into their program and the funding that's available. There's no plans that they're aware of to slow any of the projects down that are in their pipeline. That said, I think it's highly unlikely that they would increase their reimbursement rate. That would set a precedent that's unheard of. If there were funds to be focused to the MSBA, it would probably just mean increased future projects, not an increased reimbursement rate to any particular town. They like to stick to their guns on how they calculate that stuff. And And then, basically they're still looking at a reduction in because they're based on sales tax, a reduction in how they're going to be funded for future projects. That said, at their last meeting, their last board meeting, from what I understand, they are still continuing to invite districts into their system. I don't see how moving this to, personally don't see how moving this to September would basically inhibit us from increased funding in any way. If anything, I think that type of thing, even if it were to happen, is going to take some time to work out, and I don't see it happening in the next basically 6 to 8 weeks.
Overall, it sounds like this is a modest change in the schedule, and we're not
I think that's true.
doing any significant damage to our position.
No, and actually, I think, go ahead, Tim.
Well, we're not impacting as of now, we're not impacting the permanent board vote or the final approval by the town in the spring. So they don't get nervous about these movements, because a lot of districts are talking this way, until it gets beyond until you exceed your feasibility study deadline by 6 months, because until that point they can take staff action to approve these kinds of moves. This is a pretty modest move. I mean, we're on projects that are more, they're looking beyond even September, because of the fact that it doesn't look like we're going to be in much better position in September from the point of view of having a lot of robust public meetings and stuff. So I think that September 8th is a good date, because we now learn we can't do, the whole thing around, one of the things we can't do is have a really proper traffic study done, because the schools now we know now that they're not going to be in session now. So we're going to have to find a way to model traffic in a way that I'm not sure how we'll do that, but obviously we're not going to, the more time we have to figure that out, I think the better, and do that in the in the summer, because I don't think it's going to improve in September even, potentially. So I don't think September 8th is, I think our challenge is going to be able to make September 8th, which really is largely right after the summer. So it's not like there's going to be it's going to be to make the summer a very, productive time. That's going to be our challenge, given the kind of situation we're in. But I'm totally on board with moving the date, because I think we're not nearly at a point where we could, make July 8th, given all the sort of prerequisites.
As a frame of reference, Mike, the Ashland project that we're working on now, even before this COVID stuff, needed some additional time to make some decisions. And they pushed their submission date for PSR back by 2 months. And that was not a problem for the MSBA. That was for all this COVID stuff. I imagine more towns are going to be asking for more time than that, as Tim referred to.
If I can just say from my experience of working at the MSBA would much rather that a district take the time to get the public input and make the decisions correctly than rush anything.
Excellent. Does that help, Mike?
That answers my question. Thank you.
Okay. Does anybody on the committee have any objection to that before we sort of proceed and talk through the steps moving forward?
Mike, it's Mike Weber. I don't have any objections. I'm fine with the move. But the schedule that was just on the screen said 10/14, not 9/9. So maybe I'm reading that wrong.
That's probably the MSBA board meeting. We need to submit a month ahead of time, basically, to get all the documents in front of them.
Okay, so.
Where is that, Lynn?
The 10/14 date is so we would submit here on September 9th.
Okay.
Then there's a review period by the MSBA, and then a response period by our team, and that ends on October 14th.
I
And
was
then-
reading it wrong. That makes sense.
Okay.
Thanks, Lynn. Good.
All right. So any other comments, questions on that schedule change? What Lynn has up on the screen now is basically some of the milestones that this adjustment would require, shifting of some dates.
So basically, we would need a vote on the preferred grade configuration and preferred site by June 10th.
Yeah, and I will mention we are using a cost estimator. So in this case, trying to do that work in July, basically to then allow us to, in early August, agree on a preferred scheme, and then we spend a month buttoning up our report to present to the committee for a draft review prior to submission.
Correct. All right, I'll hand
Sorry,
the press.
so can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
So are you saying that we need to decide on 6? Because I thought we were talking about advancing a couple of these, you know, the sort of ones we think are going to get sort of the short list into further and having a little more time than 6/10 to make a decision on a preferred site. If we're talking about a 9/8 submission, are you saying that's the decision date?
I think from our standpoint, if we could target then, we know that there may be some still thinking about it. Certainly from our side, we have some schemes to show tonight,
Right.
and are going to continue to show schemes. So I think, you know, sometime in that period, and I think we can, from our standpoint at Arrow Street at least, remain a bit flexible. But let's say some point in the first part of June, hopefully folks are reaching conclusion on whether it's a 3-4-5 or a 4-5 school.
Yeah, no, I get that, but I mean, I think on the, I mean, I do think, I think we should be able to give you some feedback on where we as a committee are leaning, but I'm just not sure that we're going to have like a vote on 6/10, given some of the issues we're dealing with.
Sure.
But I don't think you need one on 6/10 is my point. I think you need it, you know, you're probably going to need it in the summer, which is not going to be that much better, but at least it does buy us, you know, some time to sort through some of these issues.
Yeah, I think the usual thing we try to do is kind of get decisions buttoned up in June, because we know a lot of people usually disappear in July and August. This year, I think it's going to be a bit of a crapshoot as to whether people will be taking their usual vacations and things, or whether people will be close to home and therefore be able to make these kind of decisions. We haven't quite figured out the entire schedule. Somewhere in here presumably are some series of meetings that you will likely want to have with the community. And again, we want to target those depending on, you know, you don't want to have one, for instance, over the July 4th holiday because people aren't around, but
Right, of course,
we can target that with you guys.
Yeah. Well, we're going to talk more about, I think, when we get to the communications, how we get more community feedback.
Sure.
Okay, Larry, can you take over the screen to go through your presentation?
Yeah. Okay, Lynn, you'll have to unshare. Oh, there you go. Okay, hang on for a minute. Okay, yep, sorry, there we go. I think that is, can folks see the title page of our presentation?
Yes.
Okay, great. I always check because I just never know. So these are the first round really that we wanted to present to the committee of the initial studies. And you'll see these are rather sketch approach to thinking about how the building will begin to come together. We first wanted to start with some of the sketches that people put together as part of the visioning sessions we had. And we thought that was kind of an interesting thing to talk about. Then show some precedent images, and we had actually hoped to go visit some of these schools. Clearly in today's climate, we're not allowed to do that, so we had pulled some plans and some photographs from the web to try and give people a sense of those. I think for those who are less familiar with how schools are starting to develop to support the educational processes, we want to begin to think about that. We then had a series of sort of diagrammatic how things are organized, and have been working with Jeff and his group a bit on that, and then showing how those begin to stack up on the two sites. So with that, let me jump down. So as part of the educational visioning sessions, the last of the community discussions was working on something called design patterns. And these were some breakout session discussions that people had and did little discussions about what they thought about how a school might be organized. And I won't go too deep into these, although I think they're kind of interesting. And certainly we want to keep them in mind as they represent people's ideas about how the schools would be organized. But you'll see here the beginning of thinking about fifth grade classrooms sharing a collaborative space. You see the same thing over here, classrooms sharing a collaborative space. What we call a neighborhood, that the classes are working together, and we'll talk a minute about how the teachers are teamed together. And then as you see in this scheme, you have a series of neighborhoods that begin to break down the size of the school to the students. And we are working and continuing to work with 13 sections per grade, or 13 classrooms per grade, if you think about it that way, although there's a few other sort of shared classrooms, STEAM, breakout rooms, etc. But that's a pretty good size for a grade level for students. And we want to think about how that then gets broken down and becomes a little more manageable, both for the students so they can think of themselves as part of a group, but also for the teachers, and they can work together. The next thing we wanted to do was look and talk a little bit about how the core spaces come together. A gymnasium, a cafeteria. There's discussion and ideas about having a makerspace or a STEM room, as you'll start to see, and how those begin to come together. Someone here apparently had some architectural training, because these things are actually starting to look like a little bit like a floor plan. And this was the library media center. And I think the interesting thing for us was the idea that there's a lot of activities that are beyond just the basic reading that we think of traditionally for a library. You see a sound studio, filming against a green screen is a big thing and exciting for the kids to do. Having 3D printers and laser cutter activities. The laser cutter might be a bit advanced for this grade level, but nevertheless, that sort of makerspace. And there's the great space that's in the current Dale Street school that is the model for that. Those of you who haven't seen it, hopefully most of you have seen it, because I'd say go visit, but we have to wait until September to do that. The next thing, so we wanted to talk about a couple of schools that have been built recently, and again, in the best of worlds, we would go visit at some point, hopefully perhaps in the summer. Things will loosen up a bit and we could actually do a bus tour, because I think there's nothing like laying eyes on these kind of buildings to see it. This is the Clyde Brown School in Millis, just opened, I believe, in September of last year. And what you can see
That's right.
here,
Sorry.
yeah.
No, sorry, I'm saying that's right. It just opened last year. It's one of our projects.
Right. And what you can see here is kind of interesting, just to kind of run through. These are the public spaces, gym, cafeteria. This is the pre-K and kindergarten space. Above that, based on some site, the way the site works, grades 1 and 2 and grades 3 through 5. And what's interesting is this sort of splayed shape allows the center spine to become a really active space. And in this case, apparently the district's decision was to forego a traditional library in its own 4-wall space, but to actually distribute the resources of the library within this, which is this yellow space. So you'll see reading areas, bookcases, and so forth in there and in here. Down below in the kindergarten, there's not much of that, but there is the cubbies that start to happen. What that looks like in person, or in photographs at least, is you begin to see here is that sort of informal space. The classrooms are behind these areas, these windows, but that really brings the library directly to the students. And you can see here there's various ways that they're allowed to work together as small groups. Independent reading, there's bookshelves, there's other activities that really bring the resources directly to the classrooms. It's kind of an interesting model. We haven't seen that before, but it's a well worthwhile conversation about it. This is one of the breakout rooms, so frequently between each pairs of classrooms, they're in groups of classrooms, and you'll start to see that as we show some of our work. You'll see a breakout space, which is essentially a small conference room, if you think of it that way. It's where students can come out, do small group work, get special tutoring, sometimes related to language, English language learners, or special needs teaching. And so what it does is it brings, again, those resources near the classrooms to reduce the amount of time that the students are outside of the learning environment. You'll see here, this is the STEAM room. That's that kind of makerspace room. In this case, some doors that open wide open, and so they can begin to use these hallways for various activities. The music and art with big wide doors that bring those spaces in together. And we threw in a picture of the gym just so you could see it, but it is a pretty traditional gym. What you'll see here is there's a divider curtain, which allows essentially 2 separate classes to use it simultaneously. And in this case, they're using it for their euphemistically known as the gymatorium. Here's the stage so that they use the gym space for school gatherings. In Needham, is the Williams Elementary School. Another recently completed project, and what you'll see here, so here are some kindergarten rooms, general classrooms, and we'll show you the upper floors in a minute. And in between, actually, let me jump to that page. There we go. Here's the main floor. Again, sort of classrooms that are grouped as a unit of 4. You'll see them here. This is an extended learning area that allows, that's that sort of breakout space, and we'll show you a photograph of that in a minute. A STEAM classroom in the middle, and some other sort of breakout spaces, as well as the usual sort of infrastructure of toilets and networking and things like that. But essentially creating groups of classrooms that start to break down the size of the grade and create some sense of place. And you can see that on the upper floor as well. What that ends up looking like up here on the upper right is that extended learning area. This again is a flexible use space. You can see in this particular instance, there's a rug and they're doing a little rug time. Excuse me, but otherwise they have tables for small group work. You can see there's no real separation between this space and the hallway, which is over in this area, so that students coming by in the hall can see the learning and it becomes a really interactive space. A classroom, which for those who are haven't been in a classroom in a while, you see that there's desks that are pretty rearrangeable. Sometimes you see them on casters. Sometimes they're split down the middle. You can push and pull and the teachers can sort of quickly rearrange, but what you're seeing there is some group work. There's a rug for some rug time. You see lots of sinks and other activity spaces, really allowing the teachers to develop and hold the classes in ways that is, for those of us who went to school way back when, you know, we all remember sitting on desks in rows and watching the teacher deliver most of the learning, and it's really quite flipped on its head these days. Teachers are giving direction at the beginning of class, sending the students off to do their work. They're then working independently or in small groups, and then the teacher is coming back and pulling them back together as needed to either reinforce the lesson or go over something kids may be having a little more tricky concerns about. So again, different ways of thinking. This is that library media center, kind of an open, nice space with a reading area. And we thought it'd be nice to show some of the outdoor learning spaces, just so you can begin to think about that. This is the Woodland Elementary School, which again is relatively new, and sorry, I'm blanking on where this one is. But you can see again.
It's in Milford, Larry.
Milford, yes, thank you. Thank you. We forgot to put that down here. What you can see, a basic classroom arrangement here is a pair of classrooms with this breakout room. And again, the idea is that students can come out of the classroom and in there and do specialized learning or small group activities. There's a series of these project-based learning areas that are between the classrooms here, and we'll show you those pictures again. So surrounded by the red line, and again, sort of creating a grouping of classrooms that have shared resources and then infrastructure in between. And again, on the upper floor, and you see where some of the older classrooms are beginning to be separated, and we want to think about how the school develops from, if it is a 3 grade configuration, 3rd graders having a different sense of place than 5th graders. And this is views into that school. This is that project-based learning area between the classrooms. You see there's actually a hallway along this edge, countertop, sinks and cabinets that they can use for various activities, small group learning areas, whiteboards, short throw projectors to really allow a lot of exciting use of that space. This one happens to have an overlook, which this guy is set up to show you, where you can look down into some of the spaces. Sorry, here it is, that bring some activity up and down through the building, so you begin to create some community space through there. And you can see, sort of looking down on one of these spaces, they've even gone as far as to have some interesting lounging type chairs, which is something, again, unusual that those of us who are older and remember those stiff back plastic chairs. There's a lot more ability, whether it's these type of chairs or these guys, which are the movable ones, to allow students to wiggle around, to allow them to move while they're learning, because many times they're finding that contributes to their being able to focus, even though they're doing a lot of wiggling. You see here, this is one of the breakout spaces. In this case, a lot of small little desks that come together to create a group learning activity, or can come apart and allow students to work one-on-one, whiteboard, short throw projector. You see here a teacher working with a student. Glass to allow people to see in the event the teacher is in there working with a student. You want to make sure that they're visible to the world, as well as ability to close shades if they have special needs activities going in there. And I think what I'll do, so let me stop there and allow a bit of a discussion or questions or comments from folks.
Larry, I'd just like to add a couple of things just for clarity for everybody. both the Millis project and the Sunita Williams project from Needham are what we call neighborhood schools. So they are basically pre-K to 5 schools, and those towns have multiple. Not Millis, sorry, Millis has one, but Needham has multiple neighborhood schools that are neighborhood elementary schools. So it's a little bit different configuration in the way Medfield is set up, but there are, I think, important cues that we can take from each of those projects. Certainly the Needham one was heavily site constrained as part of that, but the Woodland Elementary School from Milford, I think, is a good relevant reference, given that it is a 3 through 5, basically a similar to our larger grade configuration, though it would be even larger from a population enrollment perspective. It's almost 1,000 kids in that school. It's a pretty large elementary school, but similar sort of grade configuration as to one of the grade configurations we're looking at. I just wanted to use that as a sort of frame of reference for those 3 schools.
Yeah, no, thanks, Mike, for adding that.
Now, is this also an example of
You're breaking up, Anime.
Can't help that. Let's see. Can you guys hear me now or no?
Yep, that's a lot better.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, sorry. So is Woodland Elementary an example of a 2-grade school that converted to a 3-grade school? Is that correct?
Yes, the original school was a 3 through 4, and the 5th grade moved in once the new school was open.
Okay.
Became a 3 through 5.
Okay. Thank you. That's very relevant. Yeah.
Any other thoughts or questions on the precedents and before Larry moves on?
No, okay. We can always come back if folks think of things, and I
There's
think
a couple of questions in the chat.
Oh, let me open that up. All right, I'll read them off to you, Larry. Safety and acoustics are a huge concern for me from an anonymous attendee, not only as a parent, but as an educator. How can spaces you shared in Millis be secured? What are the acoustics like in those spaces? Shared spaces are great, but there is usually mixed success, and it takes up a little valuable space from classrooms. Too much glass, while nice for lighting, is very distracting for students, makes spaces cold, and is also not safe. So there's a bunch of stuff. So Larry, I don't want to take a ton of time, but can you just quick address of how safety is addressed with schools these days, acoustics, and how you deal with the glass exterior wall ratio?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're all good questions that require a lot of conversation and discussion. Because the question mentioned Millis, I'll go back to that plan. There's sort of various layers of security that we designers are thinking about these days. From the beginning at the site and parking layer to the outside of the building to once you come into the building. Just as an example here, this is sort of a traditional, so here's the main entrance, presumably off the parking lot, and the office space, and really bringing people in and having them identify themselves and getting them approved to be in the school before they're then released into the building itself. That's become a very important consideration for us, and there's various discussions about, you know, the configuration of these spaces, including whether or not you want to put in things that are sort of intrusion related or trying to protect against intrusions. Once within the space, from a security standpoint, we always look at working with both the police and the administration and the teachers to understand their procedures, and then to allow the building to be flexible to meet those procedures. And we haven't even begun to have those conversations, so I don't want to prejudge those by sort of trying to talk through those. But you know, it's a really important consideration for us. I think, you know, how well these open spaces work is also a important discussion. In some instances, they're a little more classroom oriented. If we think of this one happens to be going right down the middle through the classroom wing, and at the Needham School, sorry, I'll jump over to here. This is a little more classroom size space. We have seen these where this, in lieu of being wide open to a corridor, has either a glass wall or, as you saw in the Millis, some folding partitions that allow those to close up when you want to have a little more private conversation in there. But I think, you know, in general, those are all important discussions. What I do feel, and this is a little bit building on the work we're doing at the moment with the Acton-Boxborough district, being able to see students working and learning is an important tone setter for the school. So oftentimes where you think, well, we don't want kids getting distracted, but a lot of times modeling behavior is a good thing for them to see. So, and I think it's up to further conversations to how we begin to handle that.
So I would also add just safety, acoustics. These are all things that we will spend a lot of time on as we get a little further down the line. Once we have a preferred scheme, and that Arrow Street will have consultants looking at all that stuff because the MSBA requires it. And we want to ensure, you know, that those types of things are all addressed. It's something the MSBA requires of all their projects. So we'll definitely be spending more time on that, and including the daylighting as well. So I think these are all absolutely relevant, though a little bit early in the process to really have answers for. So we'll be talking more about that. I have a second question from Mark Nardelli about process. And the question reads, I know circumstances are challenging right now with empty schools, but I've been through a few of these projects, and it will be important to visit the schools and talk to teachers who are in them about what they like and don't like about the new buildings. Design ideals often play out differently in practice. Any thoughts on talking to staff? So that's absolutely an excellent question. And we're going to have to sort out a way to do that. It may be via some conference like this, but you're absolutely right. I've seen projects where certain design decisions are made, and then when reality sets in, how they actually use the space is nothing like they had originally dreamed of. So I think that's definitely something that we're going to have to take a look at if we're not able to actually visit with the staff, maybe setting up some conference calls from some of these relevant projects and sort of talk to them about what works and what doesn't. I know with our clients, we typically love to do these tours because they give you the details about what it's like to live with the building, and that's invaluable information. That said, every district is going to be different, and so what works for one district may not work for another. So we sort of have to make judgment calls about what information we're receiving from districts that operate differently than we do. Still a very good question, and I hope that helps. But we do have a lot of stuff to get through. So Larry, why don't we jump ahead into the next section?
Yeah, and I think a lot of these kind of decisions really happen in the following phase of the work, which is schematic design. And assuming that we are stay on a schedule where we're through the PSR phase in October, I would certainly hope that we're back in school by then and we can go visit these with kids in the buildings and staff and faculty around. So let me jump through to then some adjacency diagrams. So what we did and we like to do is begin to understand how we would then structure the classrooms and have a conversation with the administration and faculty about how that comes together. What you're seeing here is, again, a sort of abstracted version of a floor plan, but you can begin to see the beginnings of what we're talking about here. Sort of creating a hub that pulls together the grade level, but within that having essentially neighborhoods, in this case, of 5 that begin to then allow teams of teachers to work together. So you would probably have, and this is more for the district than for us to sort out, but 3 teams working together to understand and develop their curriculum. And we can let Jeff talk about that a little more if there's questions, but you can see classrooms, the STEM room or STEAM room, special education room, classrooms, breakout rooms, learning centers, and each of those kind of around a hub space. And within that would be some of the infrastructure requirements, toilets and stairs and things like that. So that was looking at 3 pods of 5. We were also looking at and starting to think about sort of uneven. Do we want to try and have the architecture reflect how the teaming is coming together or not? And that's a worthwhile conversation. This was looking at it a little differently, and some of these are related to how the site will begin to lay itself out. But you can see here, there's essentially 8 classrooms split into pairs around the grade level hub space, and then the rest of the school somehow over here. And what we wanted to do was think about how those connections are happening. This is perhaps a little different way of thinking about it. Can be driven, as Mike was saying, on the site constraints. You might end up with a longer linear site, which we're not seeing at the moment, but it could be, and you're sort of passing through one area to get to the second area. And if you think about what the implications are for that, it's quite a bit different if I go back, you know, where you have, this is kind of my neighborhood and this is the center gathering space. It's a little different, and we want to think about how that comes together. And this is one where we're really kind of stretching them all out, sort of beads on a string. And again, trying to put in some small spaces that pull together and create a sense of place to break down, so we don't just have 13 or 15 classrooms strung out on a long hallway. We also want to begin to think about how the more public or more common spaces are coming together. This is a diagram where what you're seeing here is the sort of public. These are the spaces that are often used after school, nights and weekends, the cafeteria, the gymnasium, health, OT, PT, which are all part of that sort of physical activity. And the media center, the library, some of the other activities, band, art, general music, beginning to be grouped together, and then the office space. And you can see as we start to think about it, this is another way of thinking about it where we're splitting it and having the library media center really at the center of the spaces, really the hub of learning. And on one side, a sort of wellness wing or wellness series of spaces, gym, OT, PT, daycare. And on the other side, the cafeteria and a stage with band around it, providing a bit of a green room activity so that if you are having a performance on the stage, they can get set up and organized in here while the crowd comes into the cafeteria. So again, these are sort of generalized concepts, how they come together. And I think we should pause there again to see if there's questions, comments from folks. Otherwise, I'm happy to show as we begin to lay these out on the site.
I'd keep moving, Larry.
Got it. Pausing for a quick drink.
That's acceptable.
I'm back. I'm unmuted. Okay. So as I mentioned in the this phase of the project, the MSBA requires us to really look at a whole host of different options. They really want to test it and test it hard. So, and then review that with the community such that people do not say, well, why didn't you look at this? Or what if we did that? And to essentially bring it to a successful vote to support the project when that happens after schematic design. So the first thing they want us to do, they do want us to look at a code upgrade. I think I mentioned that at the PDP level. We haven't looked at that because that's really more of a narrative description. They want us to look at an ad reno scheme. So we have two variations on that, which I'll show. So this is the existing Dale Street School site. What you see here is the existing building, the original with the gym and the stage spaces over here. There's that link space in the original classroom building here. For the purposes of these studies, we've assumed that the existing cafeteria and classrooms around those would come down, and that we would use the space behind those two buildings to create the revised Dale Street School with the Memorial School over here, and Adams Street along this edge and Dale Street along this edge. And what we were looking at was the original scheme, which I think we showed as part of the PSR, PDP, was classrooms along this edge of the site, cafeteria and gym in this area. So that's that community spaces. The nice thing there is the cafeteria could be near parking and allow us service access for the kitchen. Developing the library media center as the center of the building with the circulation coming around and through it, with an admin as your sort of front door and keeping the front door of the building. Art and music, occupying that existing really nice space in there, and then reconfiguring these existing classrooms to meet your classroom needs. This one is a bit tricky, not least of which is because in order to take down that building and build more classrooms, we'd have to move all the students out and set up modulars. So we looked at a second scheme, pushing the classrooms to the back of the site, building a classroom wing in this area. That would then allow us to start school, have the kids in here. This portion, these existing classrooms and cafeteria could be pulled down and a new gym and cafeteria built in this area. We've swapped around admin in this area. At this point, we felt like the existing classrooms that are in this current building wouldn't make sense because we'd have quite a discrepancy between a few classrooms in here and the rest of the classrooms out here. So we thought about what if that were the library media center. It would be a fairly hefty gut renovation of that space to pull down those walls and do things like that. But it would be feasible. And then developing a play space between the two wings. The one thing we noted was that this actually, because these are essentially two-story buildings, they're double height, so they're essentially the equivalent of two. On the 3-grade configuration, this would be a 3-story classroom wing. It puts a lower height up against Adams Street, which is where the neighbors are here, and allows the taller piece to be up against, this is a wooded area adjacent to these neighbors. This was looking at, and we haven't gone too deep yet into this, but sort of taking those similar ideas in the wave your hand world of putting a bunch of modulars out here, move the students out, and then take down the entire Dale Street School and rebuild a new school on its existing site. Shares many of the same configuration that the previous one did. allows us to be a little more flexible with how it gets used. And I think subsequent iterations of this, we will begin to look at whether it makes sense to swap the classrooms out or not. But again, sort of using Dale Street as the bus entrance, kids coming in and loading this way, buses coming in here, parent pickup and drop off, and allowing the cafeteria and to start to address the play space between the two schools here. This is next alternate for, again, the Dale Street site. So we've shifted the view a little bit down the street. You can just see the edge of the existing building here. But in this case, building new between the two buildings. Again, our assumption is that the existing classroom cafeteria wing would come down following construction of a new building. What we were trying to do, and I think there's some work to still continue on this, was develop a sense of entry and connection between these two buildings, since they're sort of pushed up towards each other. Begin to have these guys down the length of the site, gym, cafeteria, art, music, and then the classrooms swinging around here. Let me go to the next. And this is a slight variation on that. Again, classrooms in this location, art, music, cafeteria, and gym. So we will begin to, well, we will continue, sorry, to push on these alternates. As you can see, they're in the very early planning stage, but, and then the next round we started looking at was at the Wheelock School. And this, again, is a bit diagrammatic, but you begin to see how it might operate. Existing Wheelock School here, Elm Street is up here, and I'm sorry we cut that off, but we wanted to give you a big view of this. We're beginning to look at a shared bus loop. The idea being the bus could come, drop the students off. Those who are going to Wheelock could proceed this way or this way. Those at the new Dale Street School would proceed either this way or some variation of that. Parents down in this area, and then if, for those of you who remember, the existing big soccer field is over in this area. And what we were looking at here was, as those diagrams were starting to do, developing smaller wings of the building that define classroom neighborhoods. In this particular scheme, looking at the Library Media Center as the hub of the school, having a sort of student-oriented entrance that addresses a courtyard and a play space shared by the two buildings, and a more administrative and parent-oriented entrance here near the car pickup and drop off. A gym near those big play spaces, cafeteria here, creating a space that can be shared between the old school and the new school. A slight variation of that was swapping those. The nice thing we thought about, although I think we've got our letters in the wrong spot, is you could put a kitchen and service down here pretty easily, and it kind of gets itself behind the building. And the cafeteria itself can open up and look out onto that play space. Excuse me. Art, music, administration, and a gym forming a space here at the entrance, and again, the classroom wings. This was a slightly variation on that. Again, Library Media Center in the middle, gym and cafeteria together, occupying that space with the kitchen sort of down here so we can do service. Art, music, admin, kind of front and center, addressing the street, addressing a bus loop, and beginning to look at parking in this area. And again, the classroom wings, where you're starting to get those neighborhoods. And again, another variation with the gym, the library, cafeteria, and stretching these out. The one thing we are starting to think about is, what is the view as you are approaching this from Elm Street and making the turn and coming down here? And do we want to open this up so that it becomes a welcoming space for the school, but still having an entrance that is focused to the parking and an entrance that's focused to the students in the play area, courtyard. This was a bit of a different shape for the building, and we mentioned and talked about, so looking at kind of stringing the classrooms out, still allowing those kind of breakout and gathering spaces in ways that create a sense of place. And then again, the library media center towards the middle, cafeteria, gym, art, music. And you can see what that does is put everybody kind of together, which might be nice. But on the other hand, it also means it's a kind of a big, long wing of classrooms.
Larry, just so everybody's clear.
Yep.
So all these schemes are sort of based off of a almost vertical stacking of grades. So if we were to build a 4 or 5, it'd be a 2-story. If we were to build a 3 to 5, it would be a 3-story. It's sort of 3 on the ground floor, 4th on the middle, and 5th up above, just as a frame of reference. So when people look at this, I know we're only looking at 1 floor. I want people to keep that in mind, that based on the overall enrollment, what we end up with is either 2 floors or 3 floors for these schemes.
Yeah, and I think and I appreciate that, Mike. You know, in any of these schemes, really the way the grade levels and talking to the administration and how they are organized in terms of the education, the grade levels are working relatively independent of each other, and the mixing is within the grade level. So that having a grade, half a grade downstairs and half a grade upstairs becomes something that at the moment doesn't feel like it's a smart move if we can avoid it. Obviously a lot of work to do for us to develop the ultimate layout of the building. But I think saying that we have all of 3rd graders here, for instance, and half of the 4th grade classrooms here and the other half upstairs doesn't sound like that's consistent with how education is being delivered.
So Larry, I think you're at a point where I can open it up to the committee and see if
Yeah, no, absolutely. Sorry, we've sort of run through a lot really fast. I'm happy to go back, answer questions, take comments.
I'd like to hear from the committee any thoughts, what you like, what you don't like, what questions you may have, what clarifications you may need. So please don't be shy. We need lots of input.
I just have a, oh, go
I have
ahead.
a question, please.
We'll take Anna Mae first.
Sorry.
Oh. Anna Mae, we're losing you a little bit.
Oh, sorry. How about now? Can you hear me?
Better. Yeah, it's much better.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm wondering, I'm still having a hard time visualizing it. Is it possible to get the kind of how it would look within a neighborhood? So for example, on the Dale Street site, you know, if the classrooms, 3 stories of classroom are right on Adams Street, how would that look, you know, within the neighborhood? And also here at Wheelock, you know, that kind of the street view, so to speak, that perspective, is that going to come at some point?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Larry. I don't know if you can do some basic 3D block diagrams of massing to go.
Yeah, we're happy to do that. What we wanted to do was start working within the shell of the building so we begin to understand the classrooms. It was certainly, Anna Mae, heavy on our minds in this scheme, which is similar to one of the ones we developed in the PDP, that by building 3 stories of classrooms, which each of those is about 14 feet, so you're up, you know, at 42 feet plus whatever, it's a pretty tall building up against Adams Street. And we rather liked, both for the phasing aspect as well as the height issue, to swap those, have the gym and the cafeteria down up against this area and then move the classrooms to the rear. They are going to be tall compared to many of the buildings in town and certainly many of the houses along Adams Street.
And
On the
may I
Wheelock,
was just gonna say, if you want a good visual, just drive by the Sunita Williams on Central, because that one's 3 stories, because they do K1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
That's right. Yeah.
Sharon.
yeah, thanks. And that's also one of the nice things if we can go visit some buildings.
But that
is
would
you
be
can
a
begin to feel
huge,
the
so if
scale of them.
you picture the Sunita School on Adams Street next to those ranches, which is, you know, it's a lot narrower than Central Ave or whatever that street is in Needham. You know what I mean?
Right, and most of the houses next to Sunita Williams are like more like colonial kind of size, you know, so they're more
Yeah.
2-story homes
So
than
it's-
on Adams, when a lot of those in that area are 1-story homes.
And also keep in mind that Sunita Williams, that site basically starts to drop off. So the building is
Right.
recessed a little bit into the site.
Yeah, the first floor, you almost have to take a half staircase down. I know the PE teacher there. He can probably give you a.
Yeah, I know the PE teacher too.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, it's definitely in our mind. We think from that standpoint, the Wheelock is a little more of a sheltered site. So probably less of an issue for folks if it's a taller building in that location.
And
Yeah,
one more,
Go ahead, Ray.
sorry, one more question, and that is in terms of future flexibility. I know at the quad meeting, for example, Mr. Marcucci brought up, you know, what if in down the road, if we're thinking long-term view, which of these sites would be flexible if you know, we decided to switch the schools around and go from 3 elementary to 2. That's not what we're focusing on now, but in terms of that long-term vision of flexibility, I'm wondering how that plays into some of these schemes.
Well, let's see. I think in both cases, we're essentially building a new school adjacent to an existing school. The way we have looked at and talked to the district, Jeff and his group, is that the Memorial would become either pre-K and the Wheelock is a 1 and 2. So there's a little more of a natural connection between 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, 5 over at Wheelock. We haven't looked carefully, but if people began to feel like Dale was more appropriate, whether you would swap that and say Wheelock becomes a pre-KK, that may be something that folks want us to look at. What ends up happening, and I think this kind of shows it, and sorry, we're sort of dialed in a little bit looking at the inside of the building more than the outside, but you begin to have, you know, there's the existing Dale Street buildings and what happens to those. There's the new building and then Memorial, and that starts to become a pretty tight site for things.
Larry, if I could add here in response to that question.
Yeah, please do.
That's obviously that's a big question that we will have to address on the future overall master plan of the schools. But I will say and Mike Marcucci can correct me if I'm wrong, but you know, the idea and the concept is still valid that if we ever do want to proceed to a upper and lower elementary school model as opposed to 3 elementary schools, the challenge would be if we did that all on the Dale Street site, because it's already constrained. And most likely, if we were to salvage, if we had to choose between adding on to Wheelock or adding on to Memorial, we would most likely add on to Memorial as it's a more recent building. Such that if we ever did proceed with a 2-building elementary school model, it would most likely be 1 on the Wheelock site and 1 on the Dale Street site, as opposed to driving basically a pre-K to 5 program entirely on one site. I don't believe that I believe that Memorial still has a lot of life left in it, and I believe that there's still a possibility that that could be expanded, given that it was designed for that lower elementary school population as it stands now. So that's a building that could be salvaged more and be added on to, I think, in a little more efficient manner. Whereas Wheelock is a bit dated. And now granted, it still probably has 15 to 25 years left in it, certainly. But that's certainly a good question for future composition. But I would struggle to see if we built a 3 to 5 on Dale Street with an existing pre-K to 1 or pre-K to K, and then we wanted to go to a 2-grade model. That would mean basically we'd have to replace Wheelock Future as opposed in its entirety, as opposed to the potential that we could add on to Memorial. Anyway, so that's just my 2 cents on it. I don't know if anybody else has a different opinion.
I just have a question about the process, Larry, with and I stepped out for a bit, so maybe if you address this, but which of these layouts have the educators sort of drawn to, not necessarily the location, but like which of these sort of layouts of the schools do they, Steve and his team and Jeff, and what has been the feedback there?
I think maybe we should let Jeff or Steve speak up. I'm happy to answer, but I think in some ways, Jeff, if you want to jump in.
Sure. I think we liked actually the scheme that's on the screen right now. That was the one that we liked really the best in terms of that Wheelock site, because it gave us flexibility in terms of how we're going to drop kids off. It really creates that nice neighborhood of classroom schools. I think we all agree that we want the LMC to be the heart and the hub of the school. So that's something that we'd like to see in the design. We also like the fact that, actually, I think the one that we liked the best was flipping the cafeteria and the gym. Thank you, that one. We think that is, basically a really good model that we could see for use after hours as well. But I think we really like that classroom cluster model. The teachers really preferred that pod cul-de-sac model of classrooms. That's what they were through the visioning session, something they wanted to see. And we like the fact to have all grade levels together and try to maybe, if we have 13 or 12 classrooms in a grade level, break those up into 3 teams of 4 and have those teachers working together. I think that the consistency in instruction and learning is really important in elementary school. We want our teachers to collaborate and work together. And the model of having 3 or even 4 teams, if we needed to, 4 teams of teachers is a really good one. And then having those breakout rooms, having special education and learning center all working together with those teachers. And then, as you see in this one, having the STEM room right off the LMC gives additional access to the LMC, but also for that grade level to work in the STEM room. Right now, the way that it works at Dale Street, Steve has a schedule put together where the teachers sign up for times and go into the STEM room, and that works really, really well. So we want to continue that type of model where kids get additional enrichment outside the classroom and use the STEM room as much as possible. So that was the favorite that we had when we looked at these on Monday. But I think that the whole concept of the pods in the neighborhood is something that the teachers really want, because whether it's a 4-5 or a 3-4-5, it's still going to be a much larger school than what they're used to. And they want to make sure that they feel connected and part of the community, and that pod variation really makes a big difference for them.
This is 3 stories if it's 3-4-5, 2 stories if it's 4-5, right?
Yeah,
Right.
as currently configured, that's our working assumption.
Yeah.
And just to jump into to piggyback off what Jeff said, looking at the art and music area with the cafeteria, we had talked about the cafetorium and to have that stage kind of mirroring there to create concerts and everything. And I know one of the things we wrote on our educational plan was to create some of those breakout rooms around the cafeteria that could both balance as social emotional rooms to allow kids to eat in there in small groups, but also for the band to practice in there would be great as well. So the set up for the classrooms, I echo exactly what Jeff says as far as the community feel, but also thinking about that, the music and art alongside the cafeteria looks great as well.
And I think as we did talk about, sorry, let me skid past. This is sort of the other model where you have sort of the classrooms, and the question we're starting to ask ourselves is, do these classrooms at the end feel quite disconnected from the common space? You know, things as simple as the class heading to the gym and spending a fair amount of time in a hallway, and some of the breaking down, whether any of these schemes starting to break down and saying, you know, smaller legs of the classroom bar help with that proximity to the common use spaces.
Yeah, I think that's the long classroom model that I think Daisy Chain, you called it, is that what it was? That long group of classrooms. That was something that both Memorial and Wheelock have now. And the feedback from the teachers during the visioning was they really liked that pod model and didn't really want to go to that long straight line of classrooms. So, you know, we feel comfortable with looking at the pod model and making sure we can have neighborhood classrooms for our teachers to collaborate and our kids to learn.
And as you can see, there's a bunch of different variations, and we'll begin to continue to study those as we go through as to how the different bits and pieces. I think the other thing for us is beginning to think about how it works on the site. The idea of a shared bus loop could be good, since the buses are serving the neighborhoods. They come here and drop off, and students can go this way or that way. And we can continue to develop that idea. The idea that the parking comes down further, giving you sort of a front door facing this part of the what will essentially become a street, because it'll have all the same width and configuration of it. But to the extent that the parking can then serve the soccer fields also seems like a good amenity.
In terms of the buses, I mean, nothing really changes as far as the transportation. We're still, all of our elementary kids still ride on the same buses now. So I know that that's been a concern that's been out there, that we need to look at the busing and the transportation. It's really not going to be a huge change. We may need additional buses because of the increased enrollment, but all elementary kids ride on the same bus as it is right now.
The only way that the busing actually changes is if we select the Wheelock site, which actually would reduce drop-offs from one location, from 3 locations to 2 locations.
Correct.
Any other questions on or thoughts, concerns on some of these schemes from the committee? Okay. We're not hearing any. We'll have to certainly, as we start to develop these, we'll eventually get to the point where we'll start to narrow these down. I'd love to hear, I don't know if anybody has any thoughts, but any of these schemes or whatever that people feel aren't working, or that you feel aren't necessarily ones that we want to keep moving forward.
I mean, so here's my take on sort of the initial, I don't think the one that puts the school at Dale right next to Memorial, I walked that route quite a bit, and that would look very congested. Any of these new schools at Dale, I think right next to Memorial would be really awkward in that neighborhood, especially at 3 stories, as Anna Mae pointed out. I actually kind of like some of the notions of the renovation scheme, the addition renovation schemes. I think that one where you put the classroom out, not that one, but the next one. Yeah, I think that's kind of, I think there's really possibility there. I know nobody wants to do ad renos, and a lot of logistics need to be put into place, and you know, that's the issue around those. But and then this too, I think Mike Marcucci's point, in the long run, for a long range planning, I don't think this would, having schools concentrated into one spot, I don't think is a really great long range plan. So although I think this it would be the only one in my mind that works at Dale Street, is to try to do something with the existing Dale Street School and and keep that sort of historic building and do something like this. I think you could actually make that look pretty good. But so then that leads you to go back to, over to Wheelock. I think, I like what Jeff mentioned. I think that kind of design around pods is pretty much what we see all the time now in terms of versus the linear sort of orientation, and the ability to separate the public and private that provided. I mean, the public and the school functions were positive. I think just in Wheelock, I'm concerned about, I just think I'm just trying to vision how that will look behind the existing Wheelock school. I think you lose, just the view of it really is just it's kind of tucked back there. There are no view planes, because that's all surrounded by woods and sort of, there's no view planes there. So I'm kind of concerned at just how that would even look, but I'm sure that, that's not necessarily the driving factor around these discussions. And then I'm just concerned about the impact of traffic, which we have to sort out on that area, adding in a whole new, school of that size and that's on that site. But, I think in a long range sense, these options on Wheelock provide more potential from a long range plan. That's kind of my initial thinking around it.
Okay, thanks, Tim.
All right. Any other thoughts before we move on? Okay, not hearing any.
Okay, so that was pretty much our, oops, sorry, I got the wrong one there. That was pretty much our presentation. Happy to continue the conversation as we go along here. Oops, so let me give you the screen back, Mike. There you go.
I think, Lynn, you should probably take back over. Put the agenda back up.
Got it. Can everybody see the agenda?
Yep.
Next on the agenda is the discussion about forming a communication subcommittee to help us with some of the community engagement that we've been discussing in our working group meetings. And Mike,
Lynn, I'm happy to take this. So I did send out just sort of a quick prefatory email for the school building committee. And based on sort of the outcome of the meeting, we had the joint meeting with the warrant committee, school committee, and board of selectmen. And especially given where we stand with COVID-19 and the fact that we cannot hold in-person public fora right now, I think it would be beneficial for this committee to form a communications subcommittee, really to try to engage the public as best we can and show to the town leadership that we're making every effort to do that. I'm pleased that we have a good amount of representation, more than we ever had with in-person meetings for SBC tonight, as there are some members of the public here tonight observing this meeting. But I think a few ideas that we had and we'll talk about in the future is just about doing some digital surveying and polling, which has worked for the town in the past. One of the things that I know that we've struggled with public engagement on these projects. I know through the building committee, as we've done two major capital projects that never had much in terms of public participation, yet still got full support. But I think we need to make every effort to reach out to the community, and I think digital means are our only means right now. So given that, I think there's some some work to be done here. I think it's best if this be done as a subcommittee of the school building committee. I did reach out to everyone. I did receive one email back about volunteering, and that's from the lovely Anna Mae O'Sheabrook, who expressed an interest in participating in that. So I think she'd make a great chair for that subcommittee. But I would like to see, at least maybe 2 more SBC members to participate with Anna Mae. In basically gearing up and sort of figuring out what are our best ways to communicate with the public in this time digitally. What kind of questions do we want to be asking? What sort of information do we need to dispel to the community or send out to the community? So it's more about information management, both inflow and outflow. So I wanted to float that out there as an idea. As I mentioned, I didn't hear a lot of feedback other than Anna Mae's sort of volunteering to help with this effort. So what I would like to do is to see if the SBC would be willing to form this committee. Sort of started off with members of this committee, and then potentially some others if needed. So I'd open it up for discussion at this point and see if anybody had any thoughts on that.
Please.
So, Mike, I will join that committee with Anna Mae, as long as she stays chair.
Thank you, Tim. Yeah.
I'll help Anna Mae as long as she makes it fun.
All right, that's
Mike, it might be nice to have Tim Knight be on there as well, if he's willing to do that. Sorry, Tim, I'm calling you out live.
So I noticed we do have Tim Knight, who's also a member of the school committee here. Tim, would you be willing to participate in that?
Yes.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Tim.
Anyone else interested in helping with this effort? Okay.
You have to be careful not to have a quorum. You have 4 now, right?
That's right. Yeah, that's a good point. We shouldn't have any more SBC. That's a good point. Otherwise, we have to post both meetings, and that becomes a bit of a nightmare. So, so with that, I guess what I would do is I would entertain a motion to form a communications subcommittee to report back to the SBC, and made up of members Anna Mae O'Sheabrook, Sharon Tatro, and Tim Bonfatti, with supplemental member Tim Knight from the school committee.
So moved.
We have Leo Brem moving. Do I have a second?
Sorry, one quick
Sorry, Anna Mae, you're breaking up a little.
C3PO seconds.
question. No, Mike, can you guys hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, sorry. So if beyond the SBC committee, if someone else outside the community could join, could they?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So do I have a second for the motion to form a subcommittee?
I second it, Mike.
Seconded by Tim Bonfatti. Going through the roll call. Mike Marcucci,
Yes.
Walt Kincaid. Walt, you still with us? You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Yep.
So in favor.
Mike Weber,
Yep, in favor.
Tom Erb,
In favor?
Anna Mae O'Sheabrook.
Yeah.
I think that was a yes, I'm pretty sure. Jeff Marsden,
Yes.
Brem,
Yes.
Tim Bonfatti,
Yes.
And Mike Quinlan also votes in favor, so that passes unanimously. So, Anna Mae, I think what would make the most sense is if you guys can start getting together and starting to pull together some ideas on engagement of the public. We're trying to move relatively quickly on this, as I think it makes sense, especially if we're looking to try to get a grade configuration decision in the next 6 weeks. And I think we can pull together a digital public forum through Zoom or whatever electronic means. I know we've been successful with that with some of our clients in the past, just to gather feedback on those topics, et cetera. But the original thinking was that we would put out a survey, a poll ahead of time.
Yeah.
We've seen some good feedback from the digital polling we've done in the past, not just on this, but on other issues in town. So that it is a formal subcommittee of this committee. So you will need to post agendas and meeting minutes appropriately.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Following up on what Mike had said, we had originally targeted April 29th for a public forum, but we may want to look at extending that date once the committee gets together. We had also started some survey questions that we can pass on to the committee as well.
Great. Thanks, Lynn.
Moving on to the project schedule, we've been having regular working group meetings weekly on Mondays, and we'll continue those through this PSR submission. We had originally added on here that we would want the school committee to announce a vote of when they were going to take the grade configuration vote, and we had that established for May 4th. Again, since we have extended the PSR, those dates will change as well. So we can discuss further about that in our working group meetings and come back and announce additional dates. We did move to potentially look at a tentative date for the if the April 29th didn't work, of March 14th. So these are just some dates that we have started to try to plug in to potentially support the PSR development. But now that things have changed a little bit, we'll have to go back and take another look at these dates. Then,
so the other thing, Lynn, just in terms of that, I think we need to sort of do some thinking around the next joint quad meeting with the Board of Selectmen and School Committee and Warrant Committee. So I'll reach out to some of those chairs just to sort of get some feedback and figure out what makes the most sense. But I want to make sure that it's productive and that I have the full list of questions and concerns from those committees so that we can address them at the next meeting.
We had targeted a date of May 19th, but again, because we had talked about potentially having a quad meeting in May and in June, when at that point, hopefully we would have a selection of the grade configuration and site selection.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we have a full understanding of their concerns ahead of the meeting so we can address it and then hopefully put it behind us in the meeting.
Okay. Oops. So moving on from that, Air Street did put together a work plan that we're working against. And again, this one will probably also need some modification based on the changes to the PSR. but we are working toward these milestones in development of the PSR.
What would be good, Lynn, is if we also, part of that work plan is sort of understanding what the topics for each of those meetings are, not just votes, but, you know, presentations and what expectations are in terms of decision making.
Yes, and I think that those things have begun to be filled out in the work plan. We'll start to develop them more as we go, but you can see they've started to identify some of the things that we need to accomplish. In terms of the overall schedule, what was sent out is a new schedule that kind of pushes out the PSR date, which has a domino effect on all of the other design submission dates. It pushes the schematic design submission to February with a April 2021 board meeting with MSBA, which kind of puts us in line with when your typical annual town meeting is. So the intent would be hopefully to have MSBA board approval prior to the town meeting vote on the project next spring. But it also pushes, the schedule also shows either a CM or design bid build general contractor delivery method. It shows the pathway for both of those. And that decision is something that we'll be needing to make in the schematic design submission phase. But right now we are indicating a school opening. This is not the right schedule. This is the schedule, the older schedule. But we've changed the school opening date to the fall of 2024, and we've shown two pathways that, you know, if we are opening in the fall of 2024, we can do one major bid package. If we want to consider a move in mid-year for January 2024, we would have to consider a early site package to accomplish that. So I believe Gina sent out separately the updated schedule. It was different from this schedule that was in the packet last week. So that in a nutshell is our update on the project schedule. We do have the designer contract amendment #1 for some of the supplemental services that are required for the PSR phase. And you should have received that in your packet, and we are asking for a vote on that tonight. And trying to put that.
Well, I also distributed this week to the committee, just asking if there were any questions. I didn't receive any questions back. Don't know if anybody has any questions tonight. To just open it up to see if the building committee, I know we've discussed this at a couple of meetings, but this isn't the entirety of the supplemental services. This is just what would be potentially expended during this phase. As Tim noted, and he and I have discussed, the traffic study remains a big challenge here. And we're going to ask Left Field and Arrow Street to sort of go back to the consultant team and figure out, you know, how we might be able to make some sort of educated projection here, given that there's really no path that I see to getting valid traffic study numbers in place from observations, given that the schools are closed. And that's going to be that way for the foreseeable future. So that money, while it may be included in this as a authorization, it does not mean that we will expend that money. until we have some sort of better understanding of what the scope of services are, and how we would potentially adjust given the COVID-19 environment that we're working in. So really what this is an authorization to start to proceed on some of this other work, especially including geotech and the geoenvironmental, or phase 1 ESA, and those would be for both sites. The hazardous material report, I still want to see, Lynn, if what we can do with our existing AHERA report. If you can coordinate with Amy Colleran on that. We have good information on our recent AHERA report. Anything we can do to reduce that scope of work would be a good thing. Given that the schools are shut down for the foreseeable future, this work obviously would be good to get and explored while it won't disrupt those schools. So the phase 1 ESA and the geotech soils report could all be work that we could achieve for both sites in the near future. So
also, if we if a site is selected in June, and if it happens to be the Wheelock site, we won't have to expend this money.
that's correct.
To be noted on that. And as well, for the traffic study, probably what we'll only be able to do in the PSR is do a narrative of existing conditions and potential issues. And we may have to follow it up after the PSR with any traffic counts.
Yeah, the other thing, Lynn, on traffic, I don't know if we should talk it over with Niche, but if they might be able to provide some data on similar schools, similar type communities, some sort of historical reporting based on whatever they've seen in the past, based on information that the schools can communicate in terms of percentage of kids that are bused versus drop off. I know those aren't obviously the hardest numbers that we'd like to have, but anything that we can do to supplement that information would be helpful.
Yeah, can I just, so I think Mike, adding sort of highlighting what you said was, Lynn, if you could, Niche is the traffic engineer. Niche is doing the traffic, right?
Yes.
So if you and Niche and Larry could get together and brainstorm ways to, because if we wait till after PSR, we've already, it's not too late, but because obviously it informs the design, but in terms of the site selection, that's going to be too late. So it would be good to, and I don't know how you do it. That's why I think you need to talk to Niche, but like Mike was saying, whether you can model certain potential scenarios, because it's not a big deal on the Dale Street side because there's already a chunk of that traffic already occurring there. The new condition isn't that much greater, but on the Wheelock site, it's a significant increase. And I just think we need to be prepared to be able to explain to the public that we've done something given the constraints of what we're dealing with not having an active school to get accurate traffic counts right now. But there's got to be something around modeling that we could at least have some idea of what the traffic impacts are on that site with a new 3-grade school, if it's 3 grades or 2 grades. They should be able to do something.
Lynn, when is the latest they could do that study for PSR?
Well, if you want the traffic to inform your site selection, it really needs to happen before you make a site selection. If you want it there in terms of just a narrative of what the traffic consultant feels are the issues surrounding both of the sites, we could have that done and included in the PSR. But I mean, maybe we would have that ready for prior to you voting on a preferred site. And like Tim said, maybe we can provide some modeling that would simulate what the conditions at both sites.
So Mike Martucci would know this, but I thought there was a traffic study done on South Street about 4 or 5 years ago when they were looking at adding another stoplight there. I thought the town had done one. I thought Chief Meany had worked on one with someone.
I think you're right.
Yeah, there was a traffic study done looking at the South Street into 27 intersection. So we do have a traffic study for South Street, and it definitely covered most of it. So I don't know how that would give us some sense.
Give you some data anyway.
Yes. Right? Yeah.
Was there a
it's
traffic
certainly
study
be
also
helpful.
done as part of the new public safety building? Because that would also give us data for by the Dale Street School.
That's a good point. I'll have to look back, dig through the files on that one.
Yeah, I was going to say if there's any existing information, that would be great. And then Jeff.
Didn't they do a traffic study for when the 403B thing was going on in town? That would be Dale and 27. I feel like there was one done for that.
You can check with Sarah Raposa on that.
Yeah.
Hey, Mike, or Christine, who is the town's traffic engineer? Who do they use for traffic, like peer reviews and things? Who is that engineer, traffic engineer? Do we have a regular one?
Christine, you're talking, but we can't hear you.
Still can't hear you. You're unmuted, but still can't hear you. We'll have to follow up with Christine.
Because, I mean, it might be better to consider using someone like that knows the town's traffic situation.
That's a good point.
Especially since we're modeling, we're not going to be able to do actual counts.
Mm-hmm. It's not a bad idea if they have a lot of familiarity.
Yeah.
The other information, if the district has records on how many kids are coming by buses, that could then allow us to figure out how many are likely coming by private vehicles. And that,
yeah, I mean, Jeff certainly has that information.
I would expect so. Yeah.
Yeah, we have all this.
I know I've heard it in the past, and I was actually surprised at how high the number is compared to some of the other communities we work with. If I remember correctly, it was in the neighborhood of 85%.
The other thing that I was thinking about too, on South Street, we have those signs that have the mile an hour as you go through, that flash as you go by the high school.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I wonder if that has the capacity to count cars as well. There might be some data from that.
Well, you mean it from past data?
Well, there could be, right, from past data on that. There could be something there we could.
I mean, it's not an issue about like getting the counts if they existed. The problem is if we got somebody out there to count cars now, obviously traffic is way down from.
No, right. Yeah, but the past data.
Yeah. I don't know if it's ever been set up on Elm. I know it's been up on Knollwood a lot because there was some speeders through there, but you can always reach out to Chief Garrett and find out.
Okay.
All right. Well, in regards to traffic, I don't want to spend too much time on it. I'll reach out to Christine and see what we can get from any town traffic engineer, if there is any existing data. Jeff, if you can forward on to Lynn and Larry any info you have in terms of the percentage of students that are bused versus dropped off versus walkers and bikers.
Right. Yep.
That would be helpful.
And
back to the supplemental services. So wanted to see if there are other questions. Obviously, there's still going to be a lot of outstanding questions on traffic, but any other thoughts on this first initial phase? You can see it amounts to just north of $45,500. Would allow us to get through all of the geotech, all of the geoenvironmental, the hazmat if needed, and the traffic obviously would be table pending.
The only thing on the traffic, this says both sites. I don't think, we don't have a big budget in general for the project. So I think that traffic on Dale Street is pretty, I think that's minimal, that analysis, because that's already getting, the traffic that's there is going to get increased kind of proportionally by 1 grade maybe, but it's more around Wheelock, I think, is really where they should spend the time versus given that small budget, because that's not a lot of money. That's my own, I just don't think they should spend that much time on Dale when they look at how they spread their resources.
Thanks, Tim. That's a good point, that what's at Dale Street today would grow incrementally if we were to pick that site. So that's an interesting one. What we were planning, and you can see here, and thanks for bringing this chart up, Lynn. While we're still considering both sites, we're doing some preliminary work, but the goal was to then push harder on the traffic side as part of the SD effort, because that's really where we want to pay attention to that. And I think from that standpoint, it's sort of 2 parts to it. One is understanding, the immediate environment of the school and how the pickup and drop off happens. And then the broader picture is where does potential impacts to intersections and other roadways happen, so that we can understand that part.
So I just got a couple of texts from Christine. The town uses a firm called Beta Engineering to review traffic. So we'll get coordinated with them, see what information we can gather. And then also she's gonna reach out to Sarah Raposa, our town planner, and gather any past studies or other submitted studies from other projects that might be helpful.
There's also a question in the chat from Christine.
Oh. So we have a question from Chris McHugh Potts. Can we at least run simulated bus-only routes using current family addresses? I've been told the bus routing software is already being used by Medfield. Lack of access for regular-sized buses heading east on Elm due to weight limit on Bridge will put those buses all going the same way on that street with biggest impact on South Street. So I will attempt to address this, but Jeff, if you have any comments. So my understanding is that there really is, regardless of the location, the only potential change to busing is, again, if we choose the Wheelock site, it reduces drop-off points from 2 to 1. So any families that are east on Elm Street over that weight-limited bridge would still be east on Elm Street over that weight-limited bridge and still need to be brought in by the minibus or whatever means exist to do that today.
That's correct, Mike.
All of the elementary school buses right now stop at all 3 schools. If we were to go with a Dale Street replacement at the Dale Street site, that would still be the case. There would still be the buses at all 3 schools. If we were to do the Wheelock site, then there would be 1 less drop off because the Dale Street and Memorial sites do not have a combined drop off. So there are basically the buses drop off at 2 locations on that site right now. So we would go from 3 to 2 in that location. That said, be no change to pick off and drop off, pick up for the buses at the specific houses. So Jeff, do you have any thoughts on that?
No, that's correct. We deal with the Elm Street issue right now. We always have.
And neither of these projects would change that, correct?
That's correct.
All right. Next up, so any other thoughts from the committee on this proposed amendment? This would be an amendment to Arrow Street's contract, basically authorizing them to proceed with this work. This committee potentially would vote on it and recommend approval, which would then be signed off by the contract awarding authority, which is the Board of Selectmen chair. So I would ask for any other feedback. If not, I will entertain a motion to approve this amendment in the amount presented.
Moved.
Sounds like I have a motion from Mike Weber to approve the Amendment 1 in the amount of $45,585. Do I have a second?
It wasn't me who did it, but I'll second it.
No. Sorry, who made that motion?
I did.
Walt.
Sorry, Walt.
Wasn't me. It was
I think it was Leo. I think Leo made the motion and Weber seconded it.
I said so moved, but.
Hey, you're kind of muffled a little, Leo. I didn't recognize you. So we have a motion from Leo Brem and a second from Mike Weber.
You got it.
So I'll run down the roll call here. Mike Marcucci.
Aye.
Walt Kincaid.
Yes.
Mike Weber.
Yes.
Tom Erb.
Yes.
Anna Mae O'Sheabrook.
Yes.
Jeff Marsden.
Yes.
Leo Brem.
Aye.
Tim Bonfati.
Aye.
And Mike Quinn. Aye. Motion passes unanimously. What do we have next, Lynn?
We have the voting of the monthly invoices. Trying to get it to the invoice summary. Here we go. We have left field.
I'm not seeing it on the screen, Lynn.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I think you only shared reader. Yeah.
Yeah. There you go. So we have left field's invoice number 7 for $12,000 for the month of March, and Air Street's invoice 726552 for $52,500 for a total of $64,500.
Questions, comments from the committee?
Motion to approve.
We have a motion from Leo Brem to approve invoices as presented in the amount of $64,500. Do I have a second?
Second.
A second from Anna Mae O'Sheabrook. Running through the roll call, Mike Marcucci.
Aye.
Walt Kincaid.
Yes.
Mike Weber.
Aye.
Tom Herb.
Yes.
Anna Mae O'Sheabrook.
Yes.
Jeff Marsden.
Yes.
Leo Brem.
Yes.
Tim Bonfati.
Yes.
Mike Quinlan, aye. What's next, Lynn?
Just for, in terms of a budget update, there's been 27% spent of the feasibility study and schematic design budget. And we're a little over, we're probably a little over a third of the way through with the feasibility study and schematic design phase.
Third of the way, schedule-wise.
Schedule, yeah, well, we're on target with the fee proposal that was scheduled that we were originally submitted, but we're going to have to readjust those because the schedule has extended. So,
Right. Okay. What's next? Lynn? Stay there for a second.
Back to the agenda. That's everything. We're just looking at maybe May 13th as the next school building committee meeting, potentially.
Any objections from the SBC on the 13th of May? Works for me.
I might be on a cruise, Mike.
Optimistic.
Prices are pretty good right now.
Yeah.
That works. Fine with me.
Not hearing
What?
any objections.
It's fine, yeah.
Not hearing any objections. May 13th it is, Lynn.
Okay, and then if there's any other new business.
So I'll open it up to the committee first, and then we'll take any questions from the public. Anybody from the school building committee have new business? Let me just run through. I'm just going to go through on a person-by-person basis. Mike Marcucci,
No.
Walt Kincaid,
I'm good, thank you.
Mike Weber,
You guys are gonna hate me.
No.
It'll be quick, I promise. So this is just because I'm new to the process overall, Mike. So we moved back the date, for a couple months, and we're all in agreement with that. Just can you give me, so now we have to pick both the grade configuration and the site by June, we say, is that correct? Roundabouts?
give or take, that's sort of the plan. That said, if we're not able to get there, then we'll have to have another discussion.
So the only thing that I'm concerned about, and I haven't heard this, and again, I'm totally new to this particular process, is what do we need to get there? Like, what are the concrete steps that we need in order to say, like, other than a vote? I get that. Like, we can have a vote tonight, but I know we're not ready for that. I mean, we need public opinion. We need, what else do we need in order to get there? And so we can all confidently have a vote. I just don't want to kick, I mean, I'm interested in moving the process along. I'm just curious of what concrete things do we need? Like, do we have that, Lynn, or maybe you can help, or?
So I'll give you my 2 cents, and then if Lynn wants to add to it, she can. But basically, when we make these decisions and we make these submissions to the MSBA, we need to demonstrate that that certain town leaders in town agree on the decisions that are made. The 3 main people that sign off on those decisions are the superintendent of the schools, the board of selectmen, and the school committee. And then ultimately, this committee makes a recommendation to each of those committees that they vote to approve. The MSBA wants to know that we're really in a place where everyone is in agreement. They're not a big fan of, having people with too much dissent amongst those committees. So our effort and what came out of that quad meeting was that we need to provide some more information, and as expected, I would say, we need to provide some more information to show that specifically, I know from the Board of Selectmen that we're making every effort possible to gather feedback from the community, and that some of these recommendations in terms of grade configuration and then next would be site selection have been thought through and have the logic behind them such that the Board of Selectmen can vote to support them. So ultimately, the first topic was grade configuration. We had the meeting. The school committee certainly is in support of a certain recommendation. It appears, I won't speak for them, but ultimately they'll need to vote on that separately. But we need sort of the Board of Selectmen to be in support, and hopefully unanimously, but at the very least in majority, of a grade configuration decision. So that's sort of what we need to work towards. And that is gathering information from the Board of Selectmen on what their concerns are and what will it take for them to get behind a certain decision in terms of that grade configuration. That's my 2 cents on it. I know it's a bit ambiguous because there's not necessarily, as you put it, concrete information.
No, it was fine. I guess, so maybe Mike Marcucci, you can answer this. So in terms of getting selectmen around those 2 specific items, do we need to, as a group, I don't know. I mean, how else? I mean, you're in all these meetings, so you have you're much more informed probably than the others. So like the next steps to get like the school committee, the selectmen to say, this is what we want, this is what we don't want. Obviously, we need more community feedback. So the subcommittee tonight, I think, is a great step towards that process. I'm just curious that we get to middle of June, which is really, if you think about it, 5 weeks away, and nothing much is changing between now and then in the world. So how are we going to get there then?
So I think, I mean, in listening to the discussion last week and the questions from Gus and Pete, I think they had some specific areas they wanted to follow up around, in particular, the strength of the justification for the 3-grade configuration. And I think Gus's concern is, what are the advantages to the town of the additional investment that it would take to get to a 3-grade building? And I think there are a number of issues that weren't addressed at the meeting, and that not necessarily that they should have been, but that Gus would like to see addressed. And so I think answering his question specifically, and then I think to the extent Gus and Pete together want to see more evidence of public input, I think the subcommittee will gather some of that information beyond beyond what I think. Some of it is just that it was a new topic for both of them. They hadn't been focused in on them. And I do think there were additional questions that were legitimately asked about the change in configuration that should be answered. And I think that I think that people are in the process of working on answering it. I don't know that it's, as Mike lays out that Mike Quinlan lays out the responsibility of this committee. I don't know that this committee is going to be making a recommendation on grade configuration. Yeah. And so it's more gathering the information and responding to the questions, and the particular questions that Gus and Pete had about what that means, and then they can have to make their own judgment about whether that's sufficient to go with what I think is the school committee's recommendation preference for a 3-grade configuration. So I think some of it's information gathering, and I do think a lot of that's underway. And so I suspect that between now and June, we'll have another meeting, either another joint meeting of all of these committees or a joint meeting of the selectmen and the school committee that might be the more relevant configuration for that discussion to answer those questions and have the next conversation. So I think that's I can't tell you exactly what's going to be decisive for either of my colleagues on the board, but I do think there's a lot of follow up, and with everybody kind of being discombobulated a little bit. I think the level of preparation we were all able to do for that meeting was probably not as great as it would have been if we weren't dealing with all the things we were dealing with before that. So I do think it's answering those questions and addressing those points, and I think there will be an interim meeting. But you ask a good question, and so we'll look at our agendas. Maybe before our next school building committee meeting, we'll have another. This will be on the selectmen's agenda again.
Yeah, I mean, that's all. My concern is that we meet again on the 13th, and the information that we have as a committee is great, in left field and Irish Grid are doing their work and moving along, but we're not, the feedback from the community isn't great yet, and next thing we know, it's June and we still don't have a response on what a grade configuration, other than a school committee quote, which is great, but we don't, other than that, we need the selectmen to buy in, we need the community to buy in. I'm just curious on that. So I appreciate both your responses. I'm sorry to drag the meeting on another 10 minutes.
Sorry. All right. Tom Erb, any new business?
Nope, I'm all set.
Anna Mae O'Sheabrook?
No, thank you.
Jeff Marsden?
All set, thank you.
Leo Brem? Leo, you're still.
Sorry about that. No, nothing new.
Tim Bonfatti?
Just a quick follow-up to Mike Weber's. Are we moving forward with the evaluation criteria matrix? And because I think we're going to want a product that shows we deliberated through all the factors that we have on that criteria.
We do have that. I know there was some feedback that was compiled into that. And maybe we redistribute that as we start to get in, hopefully past the grade configuration decision and then into the site evaluation. I know we did a lot of work to whittle it down to the 2 sites. But maybe we revisit the document and
I think we're going to want to have something that, especially since we're not able to get, robust public feedback given this time, something that we're going to be able to show people that it was a more objective decision than just kind of a general poll around the committee about what's the best approach.
No, agreed. I mean, as you know, Tim, in any of these capital projects, we've struggled to really get public engagement. So certainly we'll try to document as much as we can and reach out with this new communication subcommittee to try to gather some feedback from the public. The good thing is the digital forms of soliciting feedback has been more productive than in person.
Yeah,
and better attendance on digital meetings than we ever had in person. So there's a lesson to be learned there, I think.
Yeah.
And just along those same lines, Tim, the more information, like hard data that we can show, the less work Arrow Street and Medfield have to do on both sites. I mean, it just makes sense as well, just to save some money in that respect as well.
Okay, anything else, Tim?
No.
Amy Colleran. You're on mute, Amy.
All set.
All set. Mike LaFrancesca, are you still with us?
I am, no, all set.
Sharon Tatro. I see a nod, but I didn't hear him muted.
No, I'm good.
Right. Stephen Grenham.
All set. Thank you, Michael.
Christine Trierweiler. I got a thumbs up. She has no microphone. Need some IT help. Sounds like you're going to get a call into Owen tomorrow. All right. So at this time, not hearing any new, I will open it up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to unmute our, we still have, it looks like 5 or 6 public attendees. I'm going to open it up. I'm going to go one by one. And I will open up your microphone to ask if you have any questions. So I will first open up Chris McHugh-Potts.
Sorry, I was typing a question to you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So I think I have just one question. Would it be possible to set and keep one or more public forum dates as soon as possible? Just because it'll allow at least a good solid, 10 to 14 days of advanced publicity.
Yes, we're looking at, I believe, and Lynn, we talked about it on Monday, but it's, I believe, the first week of May, or do you remember what date we talked about, Lynn?
We had talked about the, hold on. No, it's on here.
So Chris, what we're looking to do is to try to get, and we may push it back a little, is we want to get this digital poll out, survey out ahead of that, such that we get feedback that can be addressed within that public forum. But we're basically looking at the first to second week of May for that digital public forum.
Okay. I'm just saying though, if you put a date in stone, you can at least promote the date further in advance, so people can put it on their calendar. No, especially parents with young kids, they already had a really tough day, with everything else going on, that their evenings are kind of shot. So I just think it's in your best interest to set it in stone.
We've also discussed moving the time up a little bit to 4 or 5 p.m. instead of the 6 or 7 p.m. that we've done in the past.
Okay, I mean, you may want to do a poll just on the best time, on the best time too, might help. And I just also think, it was interesting, like just listening to the conversation about, what other kind of information that people are going to need. I just think overall that, with this pandemic, I mean, the increased financial pressures on everybody right now due to job losses and also on the town finances, I think it's just, if everyone can just be sensitive to that, everyone involved in this project can really just think about those people and how, put themselves in their shoes, and then think about what you would do how would you talk to those people on your own if you were talking to them on the street, and use that as a basis of trying to formulate how you want to approach the public awareness. I don't know if that helps, but I think it's just important to sort of remove yourself from the committee to a certain point and think like an average citizen who knows nothing about this project. And what would you say to them if you bumped into them on the street about where we are in this and what you're going to need and what the challenges are? And because there's so much that has happened so quickly that it's difficult for people to get up to speed with just the language alone, the acronyms and everything else. It just becomes a little overwhelming for people.
Good point taken. Next up, I'm going to go to Jeremy Marset. Jeremy, do you have any questions? You have to unmute yourself if you do.
No, I'm fine for now. Thanks, Mike. I know the warrant committee in general has been gathering questions, and I'm sure Mike Pastore will be distributing those to the group shortly.
Great, that would be much appreciated. All right, next up, Louisa, I'm going to struggle to pronounce your last name, so I apologize if I pronounce it wrong. Louisa Guthro.
Guthro, but no question.
Sorry about that.
Thanks so much. That's all right. Thanks so much. No question. No, thank you.
All right, next we have Robert Sliney.
No questions, thank you.
All right. All right, I think I got everybody. So unless I hear otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to close the meeting.
So moved by Mike Marcucci.
Second.
Enthusiastically moved by Mike Marcucci and seconded by Jeff Marsden. We run through the list here. Mike Marcucci.
Aye.
Paul
Bye, everybody.
Kincaid,
Yes. Thank you.
Mike Weber. Tom Herb.
Yes.
Anne Mae O'Sheabrook.
Yes.
Jeff Marsden.
Yes.
Leo Brem. Leo, you're on mute.
Aye.
Tim Bunfati.
Yes.
And I also vote yes. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate your time. This was a great conversation.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike.
Shortly. Stay
Thanks, Mike.
safe, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Guys.
Thank you all. Good night.
Thank you.